Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of the podcast Historians in Conversation, which is hosted by the University of Lodz in Poland. My name is Michaël Green and I welcome you to my podcast. My guest today is Dr. Alessandro Grazi, and he is working at the Leibniz Institute for European History in Mainz. He's actually my second guest from that institution, but Alessandro has a very interesting academic path which I would like to share with you. In my conversation today, we will be talking about the specificities of the Italian way of learning at the university, about the specificities of the German way of studying, about Alessandro's experiences in the Netherlands, and finally, why does he think that Jewish history and Jewish studies are important in the modern day world? I must say that I know Alessandro for quite a few years. We have done our PhDs together at the University of Groningen, and therefore I'm very happy to welcome Alessandro to my podcast, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Alessandro, and welcome to my podcast. I'm glad to have you here.
Good morning, Michael. Hi, I'm very glad to be here as well.
I usually start the podcast with the very same question that I ask all of my guests, and it's about their childhood, because I think that as people, we are formed in our childhood, and our first experiences are the ones that actually somehow pave our path towards the future. Could you tell a little bit where do you come from?
Yeah, so I was born in a small town in northern Italy, close to the city of Bologna.
What is it called?
It's called Cento. Cento.
Cento.
It's the number 100 translated, because in my region, which is like the Po Valley, it's a flat area. It's a region in which the Romans used to divide the land in equal parts, so-called centurie, and therefore there are several towns that have numbers as their names, depending on the number of these Roman units, agricultural units on which they were. So there are towns like mine, 100, but close to my town there's also 50, there's 90, there's yes, there's normally small towns, but there are several numbers in my.
That's a great way of naming towns.
Yeah. So generally speaking, it's a progressive Catholic environment in which I grew up. But these are reflections I made later as an adult. This is not something I perceived while I was a child. It was normal to grow up in this kind of environment for me, in which I used to go to a group of scouts, etc., etc.
Well, we will get to the scouts in a moment, but could you tell a little bit about your parents? What did they do?
Yes, I come from in the broader sense of the term, from a family of teachers at all different levels. Not only my parents, but also several of my uncles and aunts and many of my grandparents. Between kindergarten and university, in my family, there are all kinds of teachers. So this is something that it's historically embedded in my family. I guess I have that instinct as well. To be honest, it's something that I always said. I never want to be a teacher, but at the end, in our job as a historian, there's research, of course, but there's an important teaching part which I actually enjoy. I like it a lot. So my mom has always been an elementary school teacher, and my dad is a sociologist, but who has been working in different areas. Sometimes in he has also worked as a teacher in schools, and in the last part of his working career, he has been managing like what's it called, like a nursing home for elderlies. Um, so he's been working in social environments as well. But yeah, otherwise, my family, my grandfather was also on my mother's side was also a teacher in my hometown and a local politician. And from him, it was also vice mayor in my hometown. So from him, I got also the political passion that I still have nowadays. I even considered for a short while having a political career instead of an academic one. Yeah, I grew up in this very typical small town family. I have two siblings. I'm the oldest brother. Then I have a brother who's 3 years younger than me, with whom I grew up as a child. And then I have a sister who's much younger than me. She's 14 years younger than myself. So we didn't grow up together, if not at the initial part of our lives, but she was a baby at that time. And then when I moved out, she started to grow at that time. So we didn't share a childhood because she's too much younger than me, but she's also my little sister, who in the meanwhile is also an adult, of course.
Growing up with parents who are teachers brings some implications on the child, doesn't it?
Well, I think so. Yeah, definitely. Of two different kinds of implications, I would say. One that I also had a certain passion for learning, curiosity that was transferred to me from my parents. I guess. I mean, I, I, I remember a few episodes that I was also told by my parents when I was in the third grade. I asked for an atlas as a birthday present once, or a globe, for example. So actually, geography was probably my favorite subject for a while. So this is one implication. The other implication is that I had to be very careful to behave because my mother used to teach in the same elementary school where I used to go as a child. So every time, she wasn't my teacher directly, but every time I misbehaved, she would get to know about it right away. So that's the other implication. But I guess this kind of curiosity, wish to learn something, I got it from also from my parents. I mean, it's definitely an important part.
So it probably also means that you were growing up surrounded by books of different kinds.
Yes and no. I mean, in my family, my grandfather was more considered like the intellectual one. My grandfather on my mother's side, and had definitely lots of books. My parents, say a normal amount, but I wasn't particularly surrounded by books on their sides. But I loved reading already as a child, so I had lots
What
of
did you
comic
read?
books, all kinds of things. I mean, my favorite thing to read when I was a small child, let's say, and also for a while, were Mickey Mouse comics. Actually, those were probably my favorite things. But I also loved reading books, even not only novels, but for children or later regular novels, let's say, but also books with, let's say, knowledge or information, but addressed to children. And I therefore created my own small library at home. So yes, I was surrounded by books, but often they were my own books actually. And I still had them at my parents' place. These books with like small labels that I divided by category and put numbers on them.
So you were
And so
cataloging already at an
I,
early.
I, I was cataloging, yeah, but in a childish way. Where you see these labels with like the categories were like I made drawings to define the category and I put numbers on them. That was they're still there at my parents' place.
I think it's
These
pretty
books.
fascinating that at an early age you're already trying to organize reading material. It's a very helpful skill for an academic.
I guess it's a passion that I then that I could use later in my. At that time was more like a game in a sense. I just enjoyed doing that, and
You know that
yeah.
Erasmus said that children should be educated not only through proper teaching, but even when they're playing, they should still learn. So that's exactly what you were doing.
I guess, in a way, yeah.
When you started going to school, what was your favorite subject? Was it geography, as you mentioned earlier, or
After,
your taste was developing as you were growing up?
well, both things. Initially, I mean, in the first and second grade, back then, I'm talking about the mid 80s, we didn't have directly all the subjects. We were just doing Italian and math, the basic things. And then geography, natural sciences, and history started then in the third grade, but with like very basic concepts. But I remember that by then I had already exactly started reading also. My passion was reading the atlas, so this very down to earth knowledge of geography, not concepts and stuff, but I was really, like many children do, actually I was learning capital cities and countries and these things, but that was I was doing additional to what we were learning at school.
So when did you discover your interest in history? Was it already at school or afterwards?
No, yeah, I think pretty early on, pretty early on. I mean, next to geography, there was history, definitely. And so in Italy, we have 5 years of elementary school, and then we have a so-called middle school, which is like 3 years, in which basically you have all the subjects, and then you realize, or should try to realize, in which direction you would like to go when you go to school, to high school, properly. And so at that time, my conviction that I liked history or the humanities became stronger. And so I remember that I already back then I told my parents I'd like to do a high school where there's a lot of history. So at the end, the when it was time to go to high school, so when I was like 14, the most obvious option, if one wanted to have more history, was the classical studies, gymnasium or high school that
So
that,
the
that we
highest
had.
level of high school.
Well, in Italy, they're not divided by level, let's say, because they're it's not like also here in Germany, for example.
In the
I'm
Netherlands.
trying in the Netherlands as well. Yeah, I'm trying to understand the system better because I have a daughter who will start a new school next year. So I'm trying to understand how it works. I realize that here they're really officially divided by level. Uh, let's say that it's the school that most people take when they want to go to university, but it's not necessary. There are, other schools where you simply go in other directions. Um, but I wouldn't divide them by level. There was a lot of work to do. Yeah, that's definitely true.
You went to high school, to gymnasium, and there you had your classical studies, so it means that you probably had a lot of Latin. And
Yes.
by the time that you were done or you were finishing high school, and the choice had to be made whether was the choice actually to whether study at the university, or the choice was what to study at the university.
Yeah, the choice was more what to study at university. I sort of always gave it for granted that there would be university after my high school. And I have to admit, honestly, I mean, although I came into this kind of high school because I liked history, it turned out pretty quickly that at that time my favorite subjects were actually Latin and ancient Greek. That were the two. I don't know for what reasons. It turned out I had, especially in Greek, I had a really good teacher, and so they were able my teachers were able to transfer but also the Latin teacher. I mean, she was also an excellent teacher, and they were able to transfer their passion. I realized that somehow I thought unexpectedly managing well in these subjects, and they became quickly my favorite ones, even more than history. And then the decision of going to university, I gave it sort of like for granted. I needed to choose which one. But I didn't go to classical literary studies. I don't know why exactly. I mean, I liked those subjects, but I don't know, I felt that was relatively common. Actually, I mean, although the humanistic subjects were my favorite ones, I also liked the scientific subjects. So I was trying to go to a university where I thought you could combine the two. So I actually went to conservation of cultural heritage, which was presented to us as a university or a direction where one could combine humanities and more scientific subjects. It turned out to not be that true. It turned out to be perhaps an easier version of classical studies. But that was not the reason why I chose it. But yeah, I still enjoyed it a lot.
So which university was it?
University of Bologna, but it was a separate branch of in the city of Ravenna. It was still university, part of University of Bologna, but that particular branch was in Ravenna.
The studies at the Italian university at the time took 3 years, I suppose, or 4 years.
Four or five, depending on the course of studies. That was before the so-called Bologna reform, the bachelor master system that was introduced actually towards the end of my studies. But at that time, there was only one type of study for most direction with 4 or 5 years, which then was translated into an MA directly when it came into the European frame, European system. But there wasn't a bachelor master system like today. I remember the change happened during my last year, and we were offered the option to switch to the new system, BA, MA, but I remember not doing it because I was almost done, and it would have not been convenient for me at that time.
So you decided that you would get the old, if you can call it the old style of degree.
Exactly.
So the degree was in what subject? Was it this cultural heritage preservation?
Yeah, exactly. It was preservation of the cultural heritage, within which one could choose a specific direction. And I chose the direction, well, the macro directions, if I remember correctly, were two. There was archive studies, I don't know how to call them.
Yeah,
And
archival studies, probably.
archival studies, exactly, or archaeology was actually within archaeology. And I took the archaeology. Within archaeology, one could specialize either in so-called classical archaeology, so Greek, Roman stuff, or medieval archaeology, or there was this larger area of so-called Oriental archaeology, which included everything from the Middle East to Japan. Basically, it was very broad. But within that, I then, for the first time, took the specialization towards, let's say, the Middle East. So I specialized in Hebrew codicology and paleography. So
So
that
that was the
was
point when you started also learning Hebrew.
exactly. But towards the end of my studies, it wasn't my specialty. It was not a Jewish studies specialty, but there was a professor that also in my hometown was quite well known, also because he had personal relations to people from my town. I remember his daughter was in my class at school, for example, and I knew it because it was also well known for this kind of studies, and I wanted to study with him, Mauro Perani, and that's with whom he was my supervisor for my master thesis. So with them, I started studying. Initially, it was biblical Hebrew, but that I studied only a bit, and we focused more really on the codicology and paleography of medieval Hebrew manuscripts. So really on the material aspects of the manuscripts more than the language itself. Then I started also with a native speaker lector Ivrit, so modern Hebrew courses in Bologna. But this was really in the last year and a half of my. That was just the very beginning.
It seems to me that you had a very fascinating educational path. A little bit,
Thank
you
you.
could say that jumping from one subject to the other, but at the same time learning a lot of very different subjects related to history, but actually not history itself.
That's true.
And then I wonder, what was the next step? Because we met when you were doing your PhD in Groningen, and I wonder what happened before. At what
Yeah,
point you realized that you want to go to do a PhD, first of all, and then a PhD in history, and then a PhD in the Netherlands? So what were
yeah.
the options?
That's a very good question. We met at this point. We met in 2008, right? You and
Yes.
I think, and this was already 4 years after my graduation in Bologna, which happened in 2004. And but you caught exactly the important meaning characterizing part of my CV, which is, as you said, jumping from one thing to another, which could
It's a
be, in
positive
a
thing.
sense,
It's
good.
not a negative
No, no, no.
thing.
I know. Thank you. I realize you said it in a positive thing, and I enjoyed that interdisciplinarity, which everyone talks about. Truth is that, for example, in the German system where I am now, that is not really seen as particularly positive, unfortunately. Meaning that here in Germany, at least, I know that in the Anglo-Saxon systems and stuff, it's something like this is considered more positively, but here in Germany, they prefer a straightforward, deep CV, let's say, in one direction for 20 years, instead of course, these jumps that I made around, as you said, are of course related always. But it's true. I mean, they're not all in the same discipline.
But it shows your flexibility.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Yes, in a sense, that too, that too. They also developed, as it often happens in the academia, also due, of course, to me trying to catch the opportunities that presented themselves at the right time. Because basically, right after my degree in Bologna, professor I graduated with asked me if I wanted to do a PhD with him. So I would have. It was hoping to that there would be a position available where I could apply, or etc. etc. But thing is, what happened is that he didn't get the funds that he was hoping for, and therefore I couldn't do it. So it didn't. He wasn't able to, and there were no other options. Let's say at that time. So basically, he told me, okay, keep studying, keep getting better, and if the occasion presents itself again in the future, try again. So basically, I had a bit of a short break. I had a little break from the academic world, so I started working as an English teacher for a while, because during this, I have to say, during my studies in Bologna, I actually got a scholarship to study in the United States. So I was lucky enough to get this full scholarship where my parents and I didn't have to pay anything, and I studied in the United States. There, I could improve my English, and I came
Where in
back.
the United States?
I was in Pennsylvania in a small town called Carlisle, at a small liberal arts college called Dickinson College. So that's where I was during my third year of university. It was actually the experience that I think changed my life afterwards, because it gave me the opportunity to really make my English knowledge better. And I came back to Italy with an English knowledge that in Italy was perceived as particularly good, because I mean, there the general average level of English or of any foreign language is not particularly high, at least at that time. Therefore, so I started working for this local language school, teaching English at the school, but also in private companies, and that also created an experience that I used later on again in my career. And until searching online and stuff, I found the opportunity of applying for this master in literary studies at the University of Amsterdam. So this is my connection to the Netherlands, where I saw that it was a general master in literary studies, so another jump a little bit in another direction. But I saw that there would be the possibility of specializing in Jewish studies, which would be then my field, and that's what I did. So I wrote to a professor that became my mentor for a long time and still is in a way, even if I don't work with her or for her, Irene Zwiep in Amsterdam, who answered my email, was very welcoming and encouraged me to apply because one had to apply to get the position as a foreign student in this master, had to have a certain grade point average. I don't remember exactly, but however, I applied. I was accepted, and I this way moved to Amsterdam. So that's my connection to the Netherlands. So from 2005 to 2007, I was in Amsterdam, where I kept studying, and I further then specialized in the Jewish studies. But I moved from the Middle Ages to the 19th century because Professor Irene Zwiep, she's specialized in 18th and 19th century Jewish intellectual history. So I worked on Italian Jewish intellectual history in the 19th century. So that was my further jump to that direction. After that, I also applied for a PhD position in Amsterdam, which I did not get. But at the same time, I
Even as a local
applied.
candidate, which is quite
Yeah, let's
interesting.
put it. Yeah, exactly. I applied at the same time, because one tries different things, for a scholarship in Israel to go and improve my Hebrew, because in the meanwhile I kept studying Hebrew, and I won that one. I won that scholarship. So in 2007, I went for 1 year to Jerusalem at the Hebrew University, also there with the full scholarship, where I could improve my Hebrew. And that was really, when I came back after that year, now I don't have the same oral fluency, but I was actually really fluent when I came back after that year, because I lived in an apartment with Israelis and who didn't know English very well, and therefore that was a good thing for me. So we were forced to speak in Hebrew every day, and that was good. That was a good experience, and I especially had and have still this one friend, Dov, who had a good Palestinian friend as well, Omer, an Israeli Palestinian.
Israeli Arab.
Exactly. And but we were hanging out together, all the three of us. Sounds like a joke: the Christian, the Jew, and the Muslim. You know, these jokes where you have three characters. But it was really a great time, and we were speaking Hebrew, all the three of us together. And it was great. You can imagine the political discussions that we had with three very different perspectives. Me coming from Catholic Italy, the Jewish
North
friend,
of
and
Italy, like northern
yes,
Italy, which is even more specific place.
yes. But that was a great experience, and gave me the opportunity to really hear reasonable perspectives and standpoints on both sides. They are still both my friends. Yeah, so that was a great experience. Finally, after that, I kept applying for other things. I did win at the same time a Rothschild scholarship for a PhD position, but that would have been 1 year, and I would have this would have been back at the University of Bologna with my old master professor. But at the same time, I won the PhD position in Groningen, which simply gave me, for two reasons, a better perspective. Was 4 years of what back then was a decently paid position for somebody who had hardly earned anything. And also at that time, I have to say, I had a German girlfriend, which later would have become my wife. And so for me, there was also a personal reason why the Netherlands would have been a more attractive place to go. And between the two options, I chose the Netherlands. And that's how I came to have my PhD, or to follow my PhD path in Groningen, where we met.
Fascinating story. You got a position in Groningen, and then you started getting even more in depth in Jewish studies. Could you tell a little bit about your PhD experience?
I had a great experience in Groningen, both in terms of academic experience, but also the life in the city, etc. I had already lived in the Netherlands for 2 years in Amsterdam, but they're two very different cities. I mean, Amsterdam is much larger and international, which was also an interesting thing, a good thing. But in Groningen, I think I got to experience a bit more northern Dutch culture directly. Of course, the academic environment was also international, obviously. So we're speaking English a lot. In terms of my PhD, I mean, it was great because I could, for 4 years, fully concentrate on my research. I was just merely a research position. And in terms of those years, that made a lot of fun because I could really work deeply on my research and improve in an area which became my field of study only shortly before that, through my specialization in Amsterdam. And I have to say and admit that the fact that we didn't have to teach was, of course, in a sense, a nice thing at that time because we could concentrate on our research. But it became a little bit of a disadvantage afterwards, because especially here in Germany, and I understand that, rightly so, it's important to have had teaching experience. But at that time, the particular position in which I was, which was so-called bursar, so a person with a scholarship, still in a strange way because I was hired by the university through that scholarship. I would not enter the technical details, but I was not allowed to teach because of that position. So wait a second.
Your supervisor was Wout van Beckham, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly, Wout van Beckham, with whom I had a very positive personal relationship, with whom I still do. I still have a positive personal relationship. And my second supervisor was Philippe Bossier of the Italian studies. And actually, that's a characteristic that I had in Amsterdam too. I mean, my master was actually in combination between the Jewish and the Italian studies. And so was my PhD, because I've been working on Italian Jewish literature. Therefore, not or literature and intellectual history, not history per se, not even during my PhD. So as you can see,
still not.
Still not. Of course, history plays a role, and but it's more intellectual history, exactly. And so it was always a combination of Jewish and Italian studies that also there. It's positive in terms of interdisciplinarity. It gives me the possibility of working a little bit in both fields, because still now I work in the Jewish studies, but I work equally in the Italian studies. I'm like a co-editor or review editor of two journals of Italian studies. I've participated several times in Italian studies conferences. So it's a field that I'm in which I find myself as well. But this brings to the same issue that I discussed earlier, the interdisciplinarity that in some contexts is considered good, in other contexts not so good. But in any case, so that's what happened there. I had a very personal relationship with both supervisor and co-supervisor, and we were meeting regularly, talking about the things that I was writing. They were reading my things, and they were putting a certain pressure that I would finish things on time. And this was good because I, in that case, managed to finish my PhD on time within the 4 years that was required by the Dutch system.
So once you finished your PhD, what was next? Because that's the biggest issue for a lot of people, finishing the PhD and then what? And the options that a lot of people have is nothing, or some sort of extremely short-term contract for some postdoc or maybe some side job, but very few people actually get the possibility of getting a permanent position right away.
Yeah, so that was not my case. And in a sense, my life came in between at that time, because even if maybe there might have been some options of something in the Netherlands, but at that time I, on purpose, did not look into it. And so I exited for a while the academic world, because I followed the aforementioned girlfriend to Germany, basically, because she, in the meanwhile, got a position in Germany. And I thought, okay, then I don't need to look into things in the Netherlands. I want to go with her to Germany. So that's what I did. Obviously, changing country academically without any previous connection was a risky move. And yeah, it turned out to be risky, in fact. So again, so I moved to Gießen in Germany, where so at that time my girlfriend, and she became shortly after my wife. She got a position, a PhD position there. And here, my previous experience as a language teacher became useful again, because I restarted working as a language teacher in private schools at that time, both teaching both English, Italian, and I also taught beginners Hebrew for a while. I wouldn't be able to teach advanced Hebrew or things like this, but beginners, yes, and I did. And so this was really helpful at that time, in which I reworked my PhD thesis to make it into a book, which would be published much later, because, however, work took the largest part of my time.
I wonder if you were thinking at the time that you would actually go back to academia.
I was still hoping that it would still be possible, because that was still my wish, was still my dream in a sense. And so while I was working, I was also in the free time, really, reworking on my book and preparing applications for future things. But once you get out, it's more difficult to go back in a sense. In the meanwhile, shortly after my daughter was born, and that of course became there was more to do in my life at that time. Until after a couple of years, I had a lucky punch, let's say. I did get, again, a Rothschild scholarship, but this time a postdoc position to have a postdoc back at the University of Amsterdam, where I was a student. So I took that position. I commuted every other week between Germany and Amsterdam. And yeah, that's academic life, apparently, especially when you're married or when you have a partner. You try to be with one foot in the place where the partner or your children live and with the other foot in the academic world. This creates issues sometimes, but yeah, I was very happy to take this postdoc position for 2 years in Amsterdam, where I found myself being a colleague of my former teachers when I was a student there. So, and where I started to have my real proper teaching experience at the university. By then, I had accumulated quite some didactic and teaching experience, but outside the academic world. And that was my well, I had taught also already partly for a year at the University of Gießen in the Italian Studies department, there too, I have to say. But at the University of Amsterdam, I started teaching within my proper field of Jewish studies. And yes, that was for 2 years.
And then?
And after that, I luckily then got the position that here in Mainz at the Leibniz Institute for European History, Mainz here in Germany, which was gold within the academic world because it was a 5-year position. And
5-year position, but without the possibility of prolonging, which is a major problem for many of the German jobs. And I've spoken in my previous podcasts, well, in one of them with Professor Alexander Schunka from the Freie Universität in Berlin, Universität in Berlin, and he pointed to that problem too.
Yeah, this is a problem of the German academic world. This is not due to my institute itself, who I have to say, I mean, offering these 5-year positions offers positions that are longer than in most places here in Germany. But you can prolong it only if you manage to receive external grants, external funds. And this is not always easy, and not always, or never easy actually, but let's say it's not always possible. And therefore, yeah, this is the difficulty in the German academic world, that basically only if you're a full professor, you get a permanent position, or in few other rare cases in which you get coordination positions and stuff like this. But this is something, so let's say that I think in the Netherlands or Italy, the other academic environments that I know, you have fewer positions and fewer options, but at this stage of the career, when you get it, then it's permanent. This is like the main difference, because in the Netherlands, you can have a permanent position without being a professor, and in Italy too. And this is like the main key issue here in Germany. 80% of the academic staff is not permanent in the entire country. 80%.
Which of course reflects also on the research perspectives and on some at times it also research quality, because sometimes you don't have enough time to get in depth enough into a broader subject. You can of course go in depth into a smaller topic, but some subjects require long-term span of research to be done on several aspects of that particular subject.
Yeah, that's one aspect. I mean, here where I am now, with 5 years, you can dig pretty deeply in a certain subject. And if you get external funds, you can do it for 7, 8, 9 years. I have colleagues that at the end, one way or another, have been employed here for 8, 9 years because they did get external funds. The disadvantage of that system is that if one has to be kicked out of the academic world, in my opinion, it would be better to be kicked out earlier. This
At the
is
age
the
of
thing.
30.
If you're, it's not pleasant at that way at that time either. Of course, you would feel bad, but you would still be young enough to change completely. And if it happens in your mid-40s, it's more complicated to also be accepted into a different area of a different professional area, which is not the academia.
Well, I wanted to ask you about something else related to your work and related to your motivation to do history or to study history or to research history, and in particular Jewish studies. So my first question is, what is so fascinating about it? Because you are not Jewish, as you mentioned, you are Catholic. What is so fascinating about Jewish history for you? And my second question is, in the past, well, many, many years actually, the situation around Jews in Europe, but also outside of Europe, the situation of Israel and the never-ending Middle Eastern conflict, does it have any impact on your work? And how do you navigate between your research into Jewish history and sometimes, I assume, also painful elements of Jewish history, which are not pleasant neither for the Jews nor for the countries where they lived?
Well, you asked three very tough questions, so let's
Three.
let's go in order. Um, this is the typical question that I get very often. What led me to the Jewish studies, and why? Basically, the question is why. And this is something that initially I never found so strange, because for me, taking Jewish studies is like taking any other direction. Italian studies, or but also, why not biology, history, engineering, whatever direction of study. Why does one take that? Because one likes it. That's, or one hopes to get a job out of it. Let's say that this is another reason. So initially, I didn't even think in these terms. I didn't think of it. It seemed normal. I was somebody still at the time in which I was in Bologna, in Ravenna specifically. There was this professor that I liked a lot, also personally, and studying those subjects, I realized that I liked them. It was as simple as that. And then basically I liked them so much that I continued, because then I became even more interested in the culture and everything. Then, of course, then my trips to Israel and everything, I became more and more involved. Later, this question became an important profession question, because, and this is true also in other fields, like the identity, the role of your background and identity within your studies and your research area is a key question that also has interrogated scholars in the Jewish studies since the 19th century, at least, in which all the major scholars in nascent discipline, in a new discipline, were all Jewish. And I will not go over the history of the Jewish studies, but things developed then in a different way. I think nowadays you probably have three main areas. If you look at the United States and Israel, still nowadays people in Jewish studies are Jewish. If you look at Europe, the picture is very different. I don't know exact statistics, but my feeling is like 50-50, something like that. Also because you don't always know the backgrounds of people that are working. Often you do, because at the end, it's a small field. You talk, you know a lot of people, and therefore you know even personal details, but you don't always do. And yeah, then I started asking myself this question more from a professional viewpoint. The discussion of whether really at all a person who doesn't have a certain background can do research in a different background from their own. My answer is yes, because I do it. Otherwise, I would be disqualifying my own research. And I think for you, Michael, has been also at times of your research like that. I mean, I don't know if you. I don't want to mention anything personal about you, but I mean, you had similar probably dilemmas sometimes in your academic career, I guess.
Well, I was studying the Huguenots, while not being Huguenot myself and not being of Huguenot descent and not having anything to do with Protestantism. And I found it fascinating because I found it fascinating to study something else than I am myself.
Exactly. I guess it's a similar thing, but obviously, I mean, when I studied Judaism and stuff, it's not something that is totally unrelated to my background, because I mean, the connection points historically are clear, are obvious, but so it has something also of my own background, but with a totally different perspective.
As
And
some politicians say, the Judeo-Christian tradition.
if you will, that's certainly there. And my experiences in Israel helped me get a completely new and different perspective, also from what I had growing up in my small Catholic background in northern Italy, etc. And in some situations, it has been not easy, because there have been situations in which privately at conferences, some people came to me and even questioned. They even thought I said something which is the furthest from my way of thinking, anti-Semitic. For example, remember this one time that I described a Jewish Italian politician that I studied a lot, a certain David Levi, on whom I wrote a book. And I described that he came from a wealthy family. It was just a description of something true in that case. I just talked about him. And I remember in one occasion after my talk, a person came to me and told me, knowing that I'm not Jewish, you cannot say something like that, something anti-Semitic like that. I'm like,
That he
what
was
do you
wealthy.
mean? I was just describing. I didn't say anything. This is the furthest thing from my way of thinking. I was just describing the family of this person. I didn't say Italian Jews are rich or things like this. I just described this particular family that was wealthy. I mean, it's true. Yeah, but you shouldn't say that. So I had situations like this. So other situations in which instead I put myself under scrutiny, under, let's say, criticism, because of course I do realize, for example, in my current project in which I'm studying the Siddur, the Jewish prayer book, obviously, even like a non-academic Jew that grew up also as a child saying the Jewish prayers and in a traditional environment, starts from a knowledge point of the prayer book that is higher than mine, even as an academic who studied Judaism for many years now, simply because this is something they've been confronted with in their childhood and the whole time. Although I realize that in many cases, maybe they learned prayers by heart without maybe knowing their meaning, or in many cases without even knowing the translation, because however prayers were recited in Hebrew, etc., etc. So in these cases, but this is my own feeling. No one accused me of that, but you feel it sometimes that not coming from a specific background, you feel sometimes something is missing. At the same time, I do think it's good to look at a culture or a religion that is different from our own, in which we grew up, because it's good for yourself. I think you do learn a new, different perspective, but it's good for the field as well, because you as well offer a different perspective.
Exactly, and that's where I completely agree with you, because I think that that's where you bring this look from outside, and sometimes from outside you can see things that are not so visible only to the insiders.
Yeah, yeah, and luckily the field is rich with scholars of many different backgrounds, and they're all important. I say both because Jewish and non-Jewish, but they're all important because none of these perspectives alone would be enough to focus on the field 100%.
I completely agree with you, and I think that there is some sort of will of a community to protect itself. It goes, I think, almost for every community, because some things, well, don't speak about that because it's not nice. And could you answer my third question of that series of questions that I asked you about the current situation, or not really current because of this current war, but the situation in general of being a scholar of Jewish studies in a world when Jews are not always positively viewed?
No, of course. I mean, throughout the many years that I've been studying Judaism, I obviously developed also. First of all, I deepened the knowledge of the religion and of the culture of everything that Judaism is. I will not uh, give all the definitions now. And that initially, in which I didn't grow up, and therefore was big enrichment also for me in my personal life, not only academically, not only professionally. My experience in Israel, or experiences in Israel, deepened and improved this knowledge, created a certain sympathy, of course, for both European Jewish culture and Israeli culture. That they're not the same, right? And this lets me see things also differently from how I used to see them before. I've always had, also before being in this field, some political passion from my family, as I said, etc. But before being in this field of studies, I never really saw or knew enough about the Jewish side of the Middle Eastern conflict, Israeli-Palestinian conflict, if you will, but of Israeli society in general. Not only in the context of the conflict, also really of Israeli society in general, and obviously also having Arab, Palestinian friends, etc. I do see the points, or the important points of the Palestinian and the Arab side, very importantly. But of course, having dealt with Jewish studies and also Israel and etc., I feel a certain vicinity to that world, in particular due to the experiences I've had. For, I have become throughout the years fascinated by Jewish culture, religion in general, and specifically also Israeli culture.
So why do you think it is important for the universities to keep Jewish studies, especially In a climate which is visible, I think, in the past 2 months, ever since the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel, where a lot of old anti-Semitism came back and became much more visible and much more audible than it used to be. The question is if Jewish studies have a goal, not only illuminate our scientific knowledge on the Jewish community, but something beyond that, to actually teach the non-academic environment, or perhaps our academic colleagues, about what Judaism actually is.
Yes, you gave part of the answer already now, but I'll give you as an answer something I remember my brother in a recent conversation a few years ago. We working not just in the Jewish studies, but in general in the humanities, are always confronted with the need of sort of justifying ourselves. Why are we doing these things in the humanities? And it's not, although if we do it, we're convinced about it and we have an answer inside of us, but it's never easy to really define it, that way. So I remember talking with my brother and exactly complaining about the fact that it's easier if, I don't know, if you do research in, I don't know, medical research against cancer and stuff like this, it's easier to find the reasons why you do that and the motivation. But then it occurred to me that even then, you don't do so generally research against cancer, but you do research on a particular molecule that works in a certain way within, in any field, every researcher at the end contributes a small part, which becomes a small piece of a much larger puzzle. So the answer I gave myself, I'm happy if throughout my academic career, 1,000 people have a better knowledge of Judaism and removed anti-Semitic preconceptions that they had. If I achieve that goal throughout my career, I'm happy. So I guess this gives also the answer of how important I think are the Jewish studies within the academic world.
Alessandro, thank you very much for this very interesting talk, and I wish you a lot of success in your future endeavors.
Thank you very much, Michaël. It was a pleasure for me to be here with you and to have this conversation.